Welcome friends, in today's discussion we will highlight the more doctrinal and theological positions of the early mutazilites in the early Islamic world. We will explore how these scholars grapple with complex questions about divine justice, human free will, and the nature of God's attributes. By dissecting their theories on human action, knowledge, and cosmology, we aim to understand how mutazilites sought to reconcile the absolute power of God with the autonomy of human agency. The mutazilites and those who follow them affirm the divine names of Allah without acknowledging the attributes implied by those names. Among them, some consider the names like al-Alim, the all-knowing, al-Qadir, the all-powerful, and al-Sami', the all-hearing, and al-Basir, the all-seeing, as mere synonymous labels without any implied attributes. Others claim that he is knowledgeable without knowledge, alim bila ilm, powerful without power, qadir bila qudra, and all-hearing without the hearing faculty, sami' bila sam', and all-seeing without sight, basir bila basr. They affirm the names without affirming the attributes implied by them, and this has been called the credo of mutazilism. Ibn Taymiyyah in his treatise at-Tadmuriyya and in his book Ta'arud al-Aql wal-Naql discussed the flaws and refuted their views in a systematic way. The Mutazilas distinguished themselves from their Hanabilite rivals particularly by rejecting tashbih, anthropomorphism, which is the idea of attributing human-like characteristic to God. They were careful not to acknowledge any distinct attributes as being co-eternal with God, as they feared this would lead to shirk, associating partner with God. For example, they believed that the Quran must either be identical to God or created, but they rejected the idea of God's attributes like his hands being physical or corporeal. And interestingly, the Mutazilites adopted a new methods of attribution from Hishām ibn al-Ḥakam, a theologian who controversially posited that God is a body, a giant spherical radiant light. Hishām ibn al-Ḥakam described God as a body not like other bodies. And despite these unusual descriptions, Hishām ibn al-Ḥakam introduced a crucial concept, and that is God's attributes, sifat, belongs to him but do not exist within him as inherent qualities, unlike how the accidents or attributes in other beings are understood. One of the key challenges for the Mutazilites were explaining what it means to say God is knowing, al-Alim. They had to resolve several questions and complex issues, including: is God's knowledge similar to human knowledge? Does God's knowledge imply the existence of the object he knows? Since everything in the universe changes and eventually ceases to exist, does this mean God's knowledge of these things also changes or could become non-existent? And if God knows something regardless of its current state, does this imply absolute predestination? The Mutazilites' engagement with these questions often clash with the literalism of Hanabilites, who took a more straightforward approach. For Mutazilites, understanding the proposition God is knowing required deep scholastic effort, and none of them could have avoided this challenge. Some, like Wasil ibn Atta, denied the separate reality of the divine attributes, but this raised the concern of distancing God too much from his creation, and that is similar to the concept of the Neoplatonic God, who is removed from all objects of knowledge and power. An example how these ideas were developed is seen in the work of the Dirar, a somewhat isolated figure in the Mutazilite movement who rephrased the idea of divine attributes into the negative attributions. He was of the view that meaning of God is knowing is that he is not unknowing. The meaning of God is powerful is that he is not powerless. The meaning of God is living is that he is not lifeless. And this approach reflected the ongoing struggle within Mutazilite thought to affirm God's attributes while avoiding any suggestion of anthropomorphism or association with created beings. Hishām ibn Amr al-Fuati, though a relatively marginal figure among the Mutazilite, provided one of the clearest explanation of a key theological issue. He argued that God's knowledge is not always in relation to created things. Rather, God is always aware that He is one and has no partner. Hishām clarified that if one were to claim that God is always knowledgeable about things, it would imply that these things always existed alongside God, and which he rejected. Another Mutazilite scholar about ventured even further by asserting that God possesses unceasing knowledge of all primary entities and their attributes. However, this led him to a challenging position. He had to admit that these primary entities and attributes must have some form of existence before they were created, yet he strongly denied that bodies, created things, and effects have any real existence before they actually exist. When pressed on whether a particular thing was what it was before it existed, Abba denied, both affirming and negating this idea, leaving the issue unresolved. And the most refined and influential position were articulated by al-Hudhayl, whose doctrine became the dominant view within the Mu'tazila. He proposed that God is knowing, powerful, and living by the virtue of a knowledge, power, or life that is identical to his very essence. By doing so, al-Hudhayl avoided the notion that God's attributes are distinct, inherent accident. He combined Hishām ibn al-Hakam's attribution techniques with their negative assertion and declared that when I say that God is knowing, I affirm the knowledge of Him and deny ignorance, regardless of whether the object of the knowledge exists or not. The distinction between God and His attributes played a crucial role in Mu'tazilite thought, extending even to their understanding of the smallest elements of the universe, such as atoms. And this distinction also had significant implications for their views on human nature and behavior. The Mutazilites, known as Qadariya for their emphasis on human free will linked to the concept of the divine justice, or al-Adl, face the challenges of the reconciling human agency with God's absolute power. They approached this by reducing the universe to two fundamental components: bodies and accidents. However, explaining human actions within the simplified cosmology required careful analysis. While divine justice guaranteed human agency, the nature of human actions themselves needed to be understood within this atomistic framework, even when considering God's ultimate control. For some Mutazilites, like there are, the human being was seen as nothing more than a collection of the physical properties such as color, taste, scent, and capacity to act. And these properties combine to form that what we call man without any additional sense beyond them. And similarly, an-Nizam with the human as essentially the ruh or the spirit, which interacts with the body's physical attributes. The spirit, however, was considered a subtle material entity lacking the immaterial quality attributed to the soul or nafs by the philosophers. There were exceptions within Mu'tazilite tradition also. For instance, al-Mu'ammar believed that the true sense of the man wasn't located in any physical place, or could it be touched, moved, or possesses physical qualities like color or taste. And instead, this essence could have knowledge, the capacity to act, life, and volitions. It controlled the body through volition, acting as a tool for the body, much like how instruments are used, a concept drawn from the Aristotelian philosophical idea of the organicon in the anima. An-Nizam further elaborated the qualities like having power, living, and knowing are intrinsic to a person's sense or thought, akin to how fire heat naturally leads to burning. He argued that the sense perception couldn't be explained through a combination of the material and immaterial components. Instead, perception was a physical process where vision and perception intermingle. In this materialistic way, human action was seen as spontaneous and not the result of the prior deliberation or the will. And according to an-Nizam, human acts occur suddenly, al-Mufaja'a, driven by a natural impulse, al-Ghazira, without any prior mental representation or intentional decision. Although this perspective might seem to undermine the idea of the thoughtful, intentional human action, it reflects an important strand within Mu'tazilite thought. All mutazilites were expected to uphold the belief in the human free will, asserting that humans are the true creators and initiators of their action, not just in a figurative sense, but in reality. However, Dhirada stood out by proposing a different view. He claimed that both God and man are agents of human action. According to him, acts are created by God, but man also plays a role in acquiring these acts. Essentially, God is the creator of the human actions, while humans are the agents who execute them. The concept of accusation, known as iktisab, later became a key idea in Ash'arite's thought regarding human action. An-Nizam's physical theories and Dhirada's early exploration of shared agency between God and human were exceptions within Mutazilite thought. However, as the Mutazilites developed their understanding of human action within an atomistic framework, they encountered new challenges. Acts and instances of the knowledge had to be treated as tangible entities, either as accidents or bodies, or they risked being reduced to mere attributes without real substance. The Mutazilite theory of human action, and by extension human knowledge, relied on a few critical concepts. First, objects of knowledge were not viewed as abstract forms, but as distinct instances of the knowledge about specific objects. This approach aligned with their view of humans as composed of atoms, whether as interpenetrating property bodies or as an additional components of the perceiver. Secondly, they analyzed acts in terms of their concrete existence, and this led to the development of the doctrine of tawallud, or secondary generation of the effects. And this doctrine explained how real causes, or the asbab, could produce effects outside of human control. For example, when an archer shoots an arrow, a series of causes propel the arrow towards its target. Even if archer dies before the arrow hits its target, the causal chain continues, maintaining the archer's agency over the action. And this theory allowed Mutazilites to attribute certain effects, like the pain inflicted by an arrow, to human agency rather than solely to God's causal authority. Additionally, they developed a corresponding theory of non-action, which is called tark, which examined individual instances of omission and raised questions about whether it was possible to abstain from more than one act simultaneously. This attention to detail in their theodicy extended even to the atomic level. The early Mutazilites were a dynamic and intellectually stimulating group. Their approach was not uniform or merely defensive, rather they creatively expanded on the Quranic revelation while engaging with the various philosophical and theological traditions. Despite facing criticism for their physical and psychological speculations, their ideas resonated across different sects, cultures, and religious communities. And for this episode, friends, and in our next episode, we will shift our focus to the broader Mutazilite movement, examining their role as a pioneering intellectual force and lasting impact of their scholarly contribution and the development of Islamic theology and philosophy. So, stay tuned as we continue to uncover the rich legacy of Mutazila. Thanks for watching.